President Cyril Ramaphosa's administration is determined to restore investor confidence and turn the economy around. The President has set a target of raising 1.2 trillion rand in new investments in the next 5 years. Earlier today, he addressed delegates at the second annual investment conference in Sandton, appealing to investors to open their wallets. Now, Devan Murugan joins us now from the venue in Sandton for the very latest. Devan, the President saying South Africa is still a viable investment destination.
Indeed, he's done that in his speech this morning. Widely expected that the President will punt the country the way he did. A few challenges that he touched on as well. I mean, it's obvious that the Eskom issue would come up, and he going all the way out to convince the investors here that government has the situation under control. But then he also spoke about the just massive opportunities in South Africa and what sets it apart from African destinations, for example, the diversified economy, the judiciary that is strengthened in many ways, institutional strength overall, and then of course unleashing all those figures and those pledges that came after him. Lots of big numbers today, Marcel, I must tell you, but we'll try and figure out as to how much of that's new and how much of that is just an extension of previous plans. But let's get into a very, very important section now. I mean, I'm with Small Business Development Minister Kumbutso Ntshavheni. Minister, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. In a way, I would think that your department needs to watch what happens here very, very keenly, because you have these big businesses pledging these huge amounts. You would want to see that trickling down to the smallest vendor in town. I mean, that is inclusive growth, isn't it?
Thank you for having us. Actually, we call ourselves the hawks of the conference. But what has been interesting for us and very encouraging is that of the pledges that have been made today and even yesterday when we were doing the sword turning and the other, there's a clear path of how the SMME participate, not only at the smallest level of crumbs, but at the level, like if you use the pledges for the automotive sector, for instance, that coming up to around 40 billion rands that has been pledged. They are having a clear program of how to get the SMMEs and do the enterprise and supply development to move them from just ordinary players to become tier 4, tier 3 and tier 2 component suppliers in the automotive sector. For us, it's very critical for that. But also across the range, even the master plan that has been signed on the fashion, the textile and fashion component, there's a clear path for how the SMMEs come into that space, because there's an acknowledgement, and this is driven also by our president, that SMMEs must transform this economy. It must be inclusive, and we can only do that when we have the SMMEs participating. But also for our entry into the African market big time, we need our SMMEs to be agile and to take the business forward.
So they have to be agile, they need to take their businesses forward. But if you look at the stats last week, I think it was in the 3 months leading up to August, you had 43% of insolvencies, and that alone tells you how dire the need is to support this particular brand or bracket of the economy.
That's true. The statistics have been horrendous, but there are a number of things that we have now come around to accept that we must do. There's an issue of de-risking the funding in the sector, and as government we are going to unveil plans of how we are going to de-risk or cover the risk component of that. But secondly is the issue of business rescue, because most of the businesses that are failing, they're not failing because they are not good businesses. They are failing because maybe they've lost a major contract and some few things that if they had a cover they could do well. And it's only in our country of all the developing or emerging economies that you don't celebrate people who have learned by failing and risen. So we're saying if they've learned, they've risen, we want to be there. We have spoken previously about the need to revisit our credit valuation, especially for business funding, and we are critically working on that. So for us, with those statistics, they just bolster our commitment to change the focus to business rescue, de-risking and creditworthiness or credit evaluation for SMMEs, more so for township and rural area enterprises and the SMME ecosystem in general.
And that's where the job lies. That's how you get people into the employment spectrum of this country to make a dent in that staggering unemployment rate. What is it? 10 million people out of jobs in this country. Now, you've had the likes of MTN, you had SAPI, you had the automobile fraternity putting forward pledges that have a lot of zeros behind them. Again, I want to bring up this question. How do you monitor that money finally gets down and empowers the smallest of businesses? Because, I mean, that's really been a challenge. It's been very disappointing, to say the least, in the last few years.
It has been disappointing indeed, and in terms of our part, there are certain regulatory things that we are doing to make sure that everybody comes into play. The one, we are doing an SMME funding policy that applies across, but we are also setting the standards for enterprise and supply development for the country, affecting the private sector, to make it compulsory for them to do certain things. It's not a favor that they are growing the economy. The SMMEs are not saying do us favors, give us contracts. They're saying we give you agility, we give you efficiency, we give you productivity, because large-scale business cannot do. On the upside, as government, we get businesses that will be able to create jobs. I'm sure when you read the numbers with the many zeros behind, if you check concomitant to the jobs that are created, yes, they're in thousands, but if an equal amount was pledged on the SMME sector alone, would be talking quadruple the amount of jobs that have been created on the sector. So we are very clear on mechanisms of making sure that there is compliance. But at least with the President and his determination to have SMMEs playing in the space, and the collaboration of the partner department, DTI, we're starting to say what is the SMME component. We have to sign off agreements. Whatever they do, they have to come to us to sign off before they get approval for certain things, to say we are happy with this intervention. But we are also setting up a database for all SMMEs in the country, because per sector, across sectors and across regions, across provinces, to the detail of a locality and the product. Because we are saying to the private sector, don't just go and get any other SMME. Get them from that database, because we are saying SMMEs, we want to track and trace whether the support we are giving you as government, but also as a private sector, is making an impact. So we're saying private sector, you'll work from that database, because we can then measure the impact of your work. But we are also going to announce an index or an indicator of business, of small business support, to say when we say private sector, this is what you are achieving, this is what we want done, you are meeting that. And when we are also engaging with the JSC on the same, to say when you list the companies and you said they are compliant with all these other things, the enterprise and supply development program, are they meeting this criteria? And so those are the conversations we are having, and we are hoping in the next 3 to 4 months there should be major announcement to that space.
Well, Minister, I'm sure many of the unemployed and people that want to start business here, hopefully they also want that traction to take place, and hopefully it does. Marcel, so there you have it. You know, there's a need for some of the pledges that happened today to trickle down to the small businesses. As I said, that's one of the biggest ways in which we could dent our staggering unemployment rate.
Indeed, and such an important portfolio there for that minister, in conversation with you. Thank you so much. Devan Murugan coming to us live there from the 2nd Annual Investment Conference taking place in Sandton from today.